Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn today, Professional Resumes to Rave About. Today's speaker is Dr. Carleigh Davis from the English and Technical Communication Department at Missouri S&T. Carleigh Davis earned her PhD in Rhetoric, Writing, and Professional Communication from East Carolina University in 2018. Her dissertation, Mimetic Rhetorical Theory in Technical Communication, Reconstructing Ethos in the Post-Fact Era, interrogates the spread of misinformation online and posits a theory of rhetoric based in cultural evolution to help explain this phenomenon. After graduation, she began her position as an assistant professor of technical communication at Missouri University of Science and Technology in Rolla, Missouri, where she has been for the past 2 years. Her recent research explores the development of alternative rhetorics in digital communities, which is facilitated by the intricate connections between culture and interface in social media spaces. Specifically, she is interested in the ways that these alternative rhetorics can help or hinder the spread of misinformation, disinformation, faculty scientific communication, and conspiracy. She also conducts research on technical and scientific communication pedagogy, especially in online instruction formats. So I'm going to turn it over to our speaker, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Clarissa. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. As you know, this workshop is primarily focused on career application materials, so resumes and cover letters. I have a little presentation that I'm going to share with you. As I go, please feel free to stop me and ask questions. I think you can do that in the chat and then somebody will flag me down. It's really easier if you ask questions in context rather than waiting until the end, so please don't be shy. But I look forward to talking with all of you. This should be fun. All right, so application materials. A lot of people have the mistaken impression that when you go out on the job market, you create one resume and one cover letter, and then you send that same set of materials out to every job that you apply for. And that's why people tend to get frustrated with job application processes, because you feel like you submit all of these application packets, 75, 100 applications, and then you only hear back from a couple jobs. Really, that's because when you submit the application packet, you don't want one generic set of documents. You want a set of documents that's customized for each job. So when you only hear back from maybe 5 or 10% of the places that you apply to, that's not because you have bad materials or because you're not qualified or any of the other lies that we tell ourselves. That's because they're looking for certain keywords and criteria in your materials. And it just so happens that you used those versions of the terms that you're experts in the set of materials that you submitted for those jobs. So when you're thinking about going out on the job market, the first thing I want you to remember is that we want a custom set of materials based on the job application for any job that you're going to apply for. And what that mostly means is I want you to dig through the job ad that you see and look at the keywords that they use to describe the position that they're hiring for. So especially the job responsibilities. For example, if you have a management position, they might describe certain roles as management or leadership, or team leadership or teamwork. All of these words are kind of synonyms. They require the same skill set. But how the job advertisement characterizes them is how they put them in their system and how they'll recognize them on your resume. So we want to be really careful about making sure that we're using those keywords. We also want to make sure that we mind the job advertisement really carefully and see which of those things they prioritize versus which they kind of relegate off to the side. And that'll help you figure out how to organize and present your materials so that it looks like you are a tailor-made candidate for this position rather than just a generic person who's applying for a bunch of different jobs. So you always want the company that you're applying for to feel like they are at the top of your list, to feel like you are perfectly suited for them and that it's this magical connection. even if you know that you've just tweaked a few things just slightly, so that you'll meet their criteria. And that's true in the resume, which can be in a couple different formats. And that's also true in the cover letter or the application letter. So you're really doing that work to show how you would integrate with the existing company, to show how your skills fit with the skills that they're looking for, so that you can prove that you're the ideal candidate. Right, so a couple different formats for resumes that we're going to talk about. The first is the chronological resume, which most of you are probably familiar with. This is the standard traditional resume genre that most of you probably learned early. So question, should you rewrite the cover letter completely or update with keywords? We'll talk about the cover letter in more detail in a little bit, but you want to mostly update with keywords. So what I do with my cover letters, I have a couple paragraphs in the middle that stay the same every time. And in those, I just update synonyms, right? So if I'm saying design or document design or Adobe or whatever the case may be, I just tweak those words a little bit. But the beginning paragraph and the end paragraph, where you should really reference the job responsibilities and how you found the position and the background of the company and things like that, you want to customize every time. So you may end up writing 15 versions of the cover letter, but you're getting a much higher return on percentage of applications submitted out of those 15 than you would submitting a generic cover letter for 75 different positions. Good question. The same thing is true in your chronological resume, right? You don't need to completely rewrite it every time, but you want to adjust things like the key terms that you use, and especially the way that you describe your employment history, so that you can make those connections more easily. The chronological resume format really focuses on your history. So it's kind of telling a story from beginning to end about your education and your employment specifically. We always include contact information at the very top because that's the most important thing. It should be the item that catches the most attention and the thing that they remember when they look away. A lot of people like the summary and objective statement. I don't. And the reason for that is it's very obvious what your objective is if you're submitting an application for a job. Everybody knows that your objective is to obtain a position in blah, blah, blah at this particular company. The only time I would advise that you actually include a summary or objective statement is for formatting purposes, right? So a well-formatted resume should be a full page, especially at an entry-level position. If you're very experienced, it can go on to 2 pages, but other than that, a resume shouldn't be any longer. And you want it to be formatted evenly from the top of the page to the bottom and from the left side to the right side. So if you just don't have enough content to fill up one full page, or if you have too much content and it goes onto a second page and you need more to get to the end of the second page, that's what that summary and objective is really useful for. Otherwise, if you're tight on space or if you have enough room to fill the content, just leave that off. Education is also usually the first thing included in the chronological resume format. We go in reverse order. So we're starting with the most recent and then ending with the one that's further in the past. Notice here, I have a PhD, but since this is a resume and not a CV, an academic resume, I didn't put my PhD on here. It's because oftentimes doctoral education is frowned upon in industry. It reads like you're overqualified, or it tends to be a deterrent for people to hire you in non-academic situations. And that's true, especially in my field. That's not always true in engineering or in the sciences. Yeah, so thoughts on leaving the education dates omitted as they may determine the candidate age. That's really mostly true for high school. So your high school graduation year, you can leave off, but for university, I think most of the time we don't make assumptions about when people went to university. It's not uncommon for people to return for education or things like that. So I would certainly include your graduation dates. If you haven't graduated yet, then the accepted format is to say degree anticipated, and then May 2021 or whatever the case may be. But that is a good point that Derek brings up in the chat. Information that you include on here tells people who you are, right? So everything from your name to your address can introduce information that could be discriminatory or could be used to form assumptions about you. If you're uncomfortable sharing your address, my advice would be to get a PO box and list that one. Or people very rarely send snail mail anyway. An email address and a telephone number can often be satisfactory. If you did a master's thesis, Allie, yes. If you're applying for anything in academia, we want the title of your thesis as well as committee members, especially the committee chair. So a CV format, which is what you would use to apply for a doctoral position or an academic position, is a little bit different from a resume. If you want to talk about that in more detail, please absolutely email me. I have hundreds of CV examples. But those are much longer than resumes and they have a lot different kinds of information on there. So the point of this is tailor your resume to the position that you're applying for, right? In industry, they don't care that I have a PhD. They don't want that information. I left it off. That's not unethical. After education, we have your employment history, again, in reverse chronological order, starting with the most recent. One of the primary things they're looking for here is, do you have gaps in your employment? Or have you been employed consistently for whatever length of time you've been a professional? Because that's the case, if you do have gaps in your employment, you're going to want to address that in your cover letter. So just make sure that anything that's missing here is something that you leave off to explain in the cover letter a little bit later. You can also list the responsibilities of each employment position, and this is where you can incorporate those keywords. So you may have the same education, the same job titles and everything for every resume that you turn out, but you tweak the employment history responsibilities to show that you have done the things that they're asking for in the job ad. Right? So make it nice and specific. It's okay if your description of your employment for one job looks totally different from one resume to another. As long as it's true and honest, you want to be able to focus on different things. Some people also include activities, and this is especially good if you do volunteer or community work. Don't do things like I played soccer in high school unless you're applying for a coach or for a position as a soccer coach. Right? This is not a dating profile. We don't need I like margaritas and long walks on the beach. Right? They want things that are really specific to your career goals and that show that you have the talents that they're looking for in the job ad. Another common section is skills. People tend to lump skills all together in one big category, but I'm going to encourage you to be a little bit more specific than that. Right? If you're applying for a design position, then talk about design software skills, skills that are specific to your industry. And try really hard to make these things that are unique to you and your experience rather than things that anybody could say. So communication skills is a common one that people want to put on there, but that really doesn't mean anything, right? Everybody in the world would say that they have communication skills. But if you say that you have experience public speaking or experience writing certain kinds of documents or things that are like that are really tailored to your industry, that's going to tell them a lot more about who you are than really generic skills. My other piece of skills advice is everybody wants to put that they're proficient in Microsoft Office on there. Don't do that. That's like saying you can tie your shoes. It's expected, it's nice, but if it's not something that's specifically listed in the job advertisement, leave that off. And then you can include references. Again, that's optional. It's more of a formatting tool than anything else because there will be other places to include references on job applications. So if you have extra space and you want to include references, much like the summary or objective, you can do that. Right. Chronological resumes are ideal for people who are just entering the workforce or people who have a lot of history to show that is in different job positions, right? But if you've been in the same position for a long period of time, or if you're looking to make a career change, then you may want to consider a skills resume. Skills resumes are less normal than chronological resumes. They're used less often, but they do have the advantage of focusing the reader's attention on the things that you can do rather than on your history and your story. So for example, notice the format change here. We still have contact information at the top, but our next section is something called skills or skills and abilities. And this is not organized by position. It's organized by things that you can bring to the job, again, that match really strongly with the job advertisement. So I've been a teacher for almost 10 years now, which doesn't seem like it would lend itself well to industry. But what I know from my teaching experience is that I have learned web design. I can build ADA compliant websites and mobile responsive websites, and I can use formatting languages and things like that. I've learned document design. I have technical communication skills. In another job position, I might add that I have like instructional skills if people want to lead workshops or things like that. So I'm making my headings here according to the items that were listed in the job ad. And then I'm being really specific with examples and software that I can use to flesh out each skill and ability. And these are things that I would have cultivated across multiple positions or doing different things in my current job. But this lets me present them in a nice, concise format. Again, summary and objective optional here, references optional here. That skills and abilities section is really what makes the skills resume shine. You do have an education section and an employment section, but they're very, very brief. There's no description, there's no additional information there. It's just a list of things that happened. So questions about skills versus chronological before we move on? No, you do not need to point to the position titles that match the skill. That's something you could talk about in your cover letter if you wanted to, but here they're just focused on the skill itself. Because the likelihood or the assumption is that you've used that skill or built that skill in multiple positions. Okay. All right. So the next section, we're going to talk a little bit about design. And I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I have a long-standing prejudice. Yes, we are going to get to cover letters. I have a long-standing prejudice against template designs. And that's because number one, everybody uses the same template. It makes it very clear that you didn't design it yourself, which kind of points to the fact that you don't have the skill to design it yourself, which is sad because it's really not that hard. But also, if you download a template and use it, it's very difficult to customize it to your particular experience and to the job that you're applying for. So I'd rather you work on designing something that works better for you. So we're just going to go over a couple brief design principles. Number one, contrast. We use contrast to create emphasis or to highlight information in documents. And we can do that by making text bigger or bolder or changing the color or changing the position. Contrast is most important in resumes because it lets you create different levels of headings. So see objective and education, those are level 1 headings. They look substantively different than the other content on the page. Likewise, Missouri University of Science and Technology, both times it appears is a level 2 heading. It looks different from the normal text. The reverse side of contrast is what we call repetition, which means that everything that's functioning the same way on the page should look the same. The level 1 headings look the same. The level 2 headings look the same. The normal text looks the same. The bulleted lists are formatted the same. We do it that way so that people know what level of importance information is designated based on where it appears and how it shows up on the page. So you always want to make sure that you have that repetition, you have that consistency to help the reader stay organized as they go through. And again, that's consistency in size, boldness of text, the font choice, capitalization, all of those good things. Alignment is where people tend to make the biggest mess. Alignment is a design principle that asks you to look at vertical and horizontal parallels on the page, almost like it's a grid. Things that fall on the same line or the same parallel have some kind of meaning designation in common. So for example, the obvious one, if we're reading in English from left to right, MS in technical communication, we know that that GPA goes with that Master of Science degree. It's just how we read. The less obvious ones, the margin is a degree of alignment. So we want to make sure that we have a consistent margin, especially on the left, but ideally on the right side as well. And then we also want to look at other vertical parallels. So this is the vertical parallel that's created by the bullet points. We want to make sure that other information in the document also falls on that parallel, or that bullet points fall on it consistently. Here we have what's almost looks like an error in alignment, because nothing else on this document falls on the same parallel as these bullet points here. It ends up looking raggedy and a little bit difficult to read. The same is true here and here. See all of these different parallels at the end of the lines, at the end of the text and the bullet points, at the end of the GPA and date information. Those are all staggered. So rather than a nice clean right margin, we have things that seem to fall all over the place, and it becomes more difficult to organize that information in the mind of the reader. So if we look at this, it's not horrible formatting, but you can see as you move, yes, you'll have access to these later. You can see as you move from right to left, it becomes harder to interpret based on the organization. All right, the last one is proximity. And proximity means we want to use the combination of white space and text to create groups on the resume that help the reader understand what information goes together. So see here under my employment history, I have my assistant professor job and I have my freelance technical writer job, and those are clearly separated by the same amount of white space after each heading. So it looks like they're almost clumped together under employment history. If we zoom in, you can see it's the same amount of space after the normal text and between the next heading, so that the green arrows, every single time. It's that nice, concise representation of where the group starts and ends. The red arrows show you places where there's a lot less space. There's less space there because those items are within the same group of text. On mine, I kept it simple. There's a full space where the green arrows are, so just an extra enter, and then a line break between the headings and the text that goes with them, so shift enter. But you can get fancier with Microsoft Word there if you want. But really use those groups to your advantage, because you want it to be clear what information goes with each heading that you have included. All right, cover letters. Sorry, we're moving kind of quickly. Obviously, cover letters go in business letter format. So sender name and address, date, and then recipient name and address. The thing about the cover letter recipient is you want to make sure that you know exactly who it's going to, right? You want to make sure that you have actually looked up the name of a hiring manager or of a person who's going to read this, and that you've included that contact information. Don't do a to whom it may concern or dear hiring manager. Find their name and make sure that you address them properly. The rest of this document is really used to put the skills of your resume in context. So the biggest mistake that people make here is they want to just restate what's in their resume, right? So go through their experience really quickly. But you don't want to do that because they already have your resume and they're really good at reading. So instead, you want to make connections between what you listed in your resume and what the job advertisement says they want you to do. So show them not only are you able to repeat the words, but you're able to explain them in context in a way that showcases your experience, right? And shows that you actually have an understanding of the nuances of the position and not just, yeah, I know how to use Adobe. So really, the middle paragraphs where you're building out the body should always connect back at the end to something specific that the job advertisement said and should place that in the context of your own skills. You should also give contact information in the final paragraph and make sure that you do a handwritten signature at the bottom. So leave 3 spaces there so that you have room to really sign. I'm sorry, I don't know what ATS visibility is. From the chat box. So what other questions do we have about cover letters? Most of the time that's not an issue. So the applicant tracking system, as you put in your information, there are a couple ways that it can go. Either they'll have you upload the resume separately, or they have an ATS that can actually read through a PDF document. So most often you'll upload a resume and you'll have sections in addition to that in an online application system where they'll ask you to reinsert your experience, your employment history, your education, and all of those things. When you put those things in separately, it's putting it into a readable format so that AI can scan through it quickly. And again, look for those keywords, look for that experience. And then it'll put your name on a list in ranking order. If your name is high on that list, then they look at your formatted resume. So that's why they have you do both. If you have a lot of skills and experiences, you do not elaborate on all of them in the cover letter. You choose the ones that are most important to the job and most specific to the ad that they've put out, and then you focus on those. So I would say you don't want more than 3 skills and experience kind of modules or sets in the cover letter, 3 distinct paragraphs. Online cover letter building tools are fine, but you want to be able to customize it again. So look at the format that it spits out and make sure that you can make adjustments manually. But they're a good starting point if you're stuck or have writer's block. Yes, it is appropriate to write cover letters in plain text for online applications. I would say they often have a text box where they want you to do that, and the text box will auto format it for you. But it's never wrong to include a formatted version as well. Sure, yeah, I can share this. Yes, you should provide your email address, and my advice would be to include a non-school affiliated email address because you can lose access to those after you graduate. Okay. All right. If you enjoy this style of thinking, this way of considering document design and working through problems like this in a way that's audience-based, I do encourage you to think about our technical communication degrees. We have an undergraduate degree, we have undergraduate and graduate certificates, and we do have a master's degree in technical communication. And all of those do get at these document design principles, obviously in much more detail, and they focused on that use of technology and the combination of writing and technology in order to achieve career goals and scientific goals and personal goals as well. So if you have any questions about those, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'm also always happy to talk resumes and cover letters if you have any questions or if you want me to look at drafts, just get right in touch. Yes, the certificates and the graduate degree are offered completely online.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really, really great presentation. We have a couple of minutes. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat and Dr. Davis can answer those. Additionally, this presentation has been recorded and we will be posting it within 24 to 48 hours under our Lunch and Learn series page on the global.mst.edu website.
Yes, if you want to talk CVs, please absolutely email me. CVs, you want as much content as possible, and you want to emphasize publications and end products, especially for R&D. So really show the things that you've done, quantity there. So like my CV is like 15 pages long. And focus on end results, especially funding. They like funding a lot. I have a separate section on mine for certifications that goes within education. So you could put it in skills, but since it's an education that's actually designated, I would put it up at the top. And then here's my email address.
And people can also reach out to global@mst.edu as well. And any questions that we get regarding this presentation, we can absolutely pass it along to Dr. Davis as well to get those questions answered.
Janessa, you always want, for font color, always black on white for resumes. Font style, assuming it's an electronic resume, which it almost always is, you want a sans serif font, which means a font with no little tails at the end. And just something simple, Calibri Times New Roman. Try to stay away from anything that's too stylized. And here, I'll just put a link. This is a link to the technical communication department website that has information on all of those programs.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I believe you can also, people interested in the distance or online programs can also find information through the distance.mst.edu website as well. So we can get you connected with that information either way you go. So if no one has any other questions, then we will go ahead and wrap up this presentation. I do want to encourage everyone who attended to keep a lookout for our upcoming events. We have a event coming up on March 31st called COVID Proof Your Career in 2021. So maybe interested in that. You can find that on our speaker series page. And thank you again, Dr. Davis, for your time. And thank everybody for attending.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.